Okay, well, I said before, this is a sort of series of Christmas. And during Christmas, I decided that what we're going to do is follow the lectionary readings throughout Christmas, which sounds straightforward until you get to the reading that we've got for today, which is the gospel reading for today. And it's not the sort of typical reading you would necessarily have at Christmastide as your, peace and goodwill to all men and things like that. But I'll give it to you anyway. It's from Matthew 2, so right at the beginning in this sort of good bit of the Bible, where they're all happy about things, verses 13 to 23. And the title of the passage gives it away: The Slaughter of the Innocents. Now after they'd left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt. They remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he'd been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or younger, according to the time that he'd learnt from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. For those who are seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. Now, it does seem a bit out of place with all the Christmas glow and joy and all that. So it's suddenly, boom, to have that reading. But I've always thought it's actually quite appropriate, because what I do find slightly disconcerting is, you've had your Christmas lunch or whatever it is, and you drank too much, you have the crackers, all that sort of business. And then you turn on the news, and there's some ghastly event has happened, somewhere around the world, some massacre. Or I remember once, years ago, there was that awful tsunami on Boxing Day. And you're sort of faced with, you've all been cocooned in this very warm environment. And you're suddenly faced with really what's happening in the world, the difficulties. And, we have that at the moment all around the world. People looking for a place of safety, a place where they can relax and be okay. Mary and Joseph had to flee to Egypt. They became refugees. It was an innocent family. And, Herod wanted to kill them because the Magi had said that it was prophesied that a child will be born in Bethlehem who would become king. And so Herod didn't want that to happen, because obviously he was king, and so decided that, what he'd do is kill all the children of that particular age so that he was able to remain being king and wasn't displaced. He was doing what people do. He was trying to preserve his own privilege. He had a privilege, he was king, and his purpose really was to try and preserve his place in the world. And he wanted to keep that privilege. And do you know, that is happening all over the world all the time. All the stuff that is going on is about people trying to preserve their place of privilege. You know, saying that these people are coming in, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our houses, you know, immigrants are responsible for all this. We want to keep what we have for fear of others taking it. And, you know, all difficult situations around the world are about people trying to maintain their privilege. Wars are about people trying to maintain their privilege. People want to keep what they have. And therefore, when people come in from other countries, they think, no, I'm okay. You know, in England, we have an expression, I'm all right, Jack. And people are that, I'm all right, Jack, and you're not coming here and taking what we have. But the extraordinary thing is, you know, there is enough to go around. There is enough to go around everywhere. And I've said this before, but, you know, if you got rid of all the defense budgets in the world, there would be easily enough to pay for all the food, for everybody to be fed properly around the world. Why don't we do that? Because of fear. Because of fear of other people, fear that people are going to come and take what we've got. I remember the Dalai Lama apparently came to the tent here and he was asked a question, you know, how would you deal with the problems around the borders? And he said, I just open all the borders. It's a situation where, you know, people don't try and preserve their privilege, but welcome people in to come in and give them what they need. You know, we're living in a state of insanity at the moment. You know, we're desperately trying to keep what we've got. You know, insanity is an interesting word. It comes from the Latin words in sanus. Sanus means health, so it's unhealthy, the insane situation that we're in. We're all trying to keep the power that we have. This is what the whole thing about replacement theory is about, you know. They have this whole thing, the Jews are going to replace us in our jobs. That is about trying to preserve the privilege that they've got. White nationalism, trying to preserve the privilege that they've got. You know, the immigrants, you know, it's all about trying to preserve privilege. And until we can let go of that, until we can welcome people in, until we can not be frightened that we're going to be put in a difficult situation by other people, it's going to continue. As you know, I'm reading this book by Ian McGilchrist, A Matter with Things. And he says, really fascinating, he says, we're now in the grip of an obsession with human power and the subjugation of nature, at the bottom of which lies our infatuation with technology, the power to manipulate. We have subordinated the ends for the means. We emphasize self at the expense of others, our rights rather than our duties, what we have rather than who we are, the material rather than the spiritual, and vaunt the reach of the unaided human intellect. In such a word, Ian McGilchrist says, God is a nuisance. Men despise religion, wrote Pascal. They hate it and are afraid it might be true. When our society, McGilchrist goes on, generally held with religion, when society was okay with religion, we might indeed have committed many of the same wrongs. But, he says, power-seeking, selfishness, self-promotion and narcissism and entitlement, neglect of duty, dishonesty, ruthlessness, greed, and lust were never condoned or actively and openly encouraged, even admired in the way that they sometimes are now. In other words, he says, we've lost all shame. And that can't help but make a difference to how we behave. Pride and arrogance, believing we know it all, and the opposite of the religious disposition of humility, reverence, of compassion. Pride and arrogance are the opposite of the religious disposition of humility, reverence, and compassion. And without them, neither we nor the whole far greater, astonishing living world, over which, for better or worse, we now have power, the power we so much crave, none of that can thrive when this is going on. It is pride, he says, that will destroy us, and quickly. With so much going for us, rising educational standards, better healthcare, public welfare, and humane and stable government, what could be against us? We ourselves. Pride was always considered the greatest of the 7 deadly sins, and it may be in the past difficult for many to understand why, but the evidence now is all around us, and it's there in the epic narrative of one of the greatest poems of our language. Pride is described in Paradise Lost by Milton for all to read. I think that's just such an incredibly accurate description of what is going on at the moment. You know, the same thing happened, led to the slaughter of the innocents. Herod thought he knew what to do to keep himself in power. I know what I'll do. I'll kill, if there's a certain children in a certain era, I'll just kill all the children. There's an evil in that. I came across Harinder Sikha. He knew he's a mystical writer. And he said, evil is not just merely negative. It is positive discord arising when the part strives to be the whole. He says the evil comes about when the part strives to be the whole. When a particular will opposes itself to the universal will by seeking to be the creative ground of all reality. When a particular will opposes itself to the universal will because it seeks to be the creative ground of all reality. It then seeks, this evil, it seeks to usurp the place of God, who is that ground, and does so perversely asserting that its own existence in opposition to, rather than in harmony with, the existence of other natures and other beings. So we're saying that evil happens when the individual seeks to usurp the place of God, who is the ground, and so that individual perversely asserts its own existence in opposition to, rather than in harmony with, the existence of other natures and other beings. It is not limitation that is evil then, but the refusal on the part of the finite being to accept limitation. It's not limitation that's the evil bit. It's the refusal of a finite being, a being that is finite, to accept limitation. And that, again, strikes me incredibly true, and all of it relevant. When we're talking the other week about humility being the compass, we're living in a time at the moment where individuals are asserting themselves over the universal, where that pride of knowing it all is being used to preserve the privilege of the few rather than the many. And why do people do this? And Ian McGilchrist quotes Hannah Arendt, the German writer who coined the phrase the banality of evil at the trial of Adolf Eichmann, talking about the Holocaust. And she says that a distinctive feature of what she calls radical evil is that it isn't done for humanly understandable motives, such as self-interest. So it's not done just for self-interest, but merely to reinforce, the evil is done to reinforce totalitarian control with the idea that everything is possible, that you can do everything. If you can do everything, then you're in total control. So you might as well try and do everything so that people fear so much that there's nothing to compete it. In other words, says Ian McGilchrist, the self of the evildoer, finally, in this situation, is too destroyed in the service of a greater power than itself, the ideal, which is simply power. So it ultimately self-destructs because it gives up to ultimate power. Power to do anything and everything possible. He says we have that lust within us. And so that lust for power, initially to protect our privilege, finally consumes even those who use it. And there is nothing left but desolation. And you can see that unfolding. You can see it consuming itself at the moment. We're seeing it in our world today, which is why the Christmas story is so relevant. It is the call to the light, the willingness of us to listen to the still small voice and to see what is being done around us, often in our name. And all through this story, the Christmas story, God is speaking to the wise men, telling them to go back the other way, telling Joseph to go to Egypt and then to go back, and then in a dream to go to Nazareth, not Judea. That same voice speaks to us in our hearts. And our role is to listen to that voice and to act on it. And it'll come to you in many different ways, in dreams, in intuitions, in promptings, in what other people say. And in difficult times, our role is to listen for that voice, to listen for that direction, rather than to be consumed by what's going on, because we are part of the story. Each of us are part of the story, and we can affect that story. So don't get caught up in that protection of our own privilege, but see that we can release others and save our souls by acting from the prompting of the voice that's within us. It's what we're put on this life to do. So would anybody like to say anything about what I've been saying today? Yes. Jessica, how nice to have you with us. Yes.
I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but I think you said something really briefly on shame.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what your thoughts on shame are and if you think we need it. Do we need shame?
Well, I think that's a great thing to mention. I think we do need shame. Because at the moment, a lot of public life, people are completely shameless. You know, what we're watching, what was I watching the other day? I was watching something, and, I know what I was watching. There's a great program called Cover Up, which is about the person that, particular journalist, you probably know, he uncovered the whole idea, the My Lai massacre. It's a documentary on Netflix, and also the Abu Ghraib, he covered that, and also did a lot about Watergate. And I was watching this, the thing particularly about Watergate, and how it was all coming out that Nixon was all blah 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 blah, and of course he resigned. There was a sense that it was wrong, that what was being done, and I thought, sort of compared to nowadays, there is no shame nowadays at all. I mean, people lie all the time in public life. And they don't care. They don't care if they're found out about lying. No one cares. Okay, fine, And it's different. And I think you do need that shame in order to, Nixon, sufficiently, was got out, but there was a sufficient shame in those days so that when something went wrong, the Watergate burglars, the cover up, blah, 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 okay, right, okay. I fess up to that. But nowadays, I thought it was such an innocent time. That is, they just wouldn't care. They put something out and say, oh, no, nothing to do with us. So I think you do need shame for people to keep themselves honest and for society to be kept honest.
Yes, I agree. But I'm sorry, I don't really know what I'm talking about. But I feel like the Bible, it's like, you will not feel shame. So it's like, there's no need for shame, don't feel shame. So what's the balance of having shame and then apologizing for doing bad things, but then also for not feeling like that soul-crushing, closed-off experience of shame and feeling like an awful person?
Does anyone want to? Yes, let's go to Catherine and then Bruce. Thank you, that's such a great question. That's great, Catherine and then Bruce, yeah.
Well, when Jessica mentioned shame, yes, I agree. We do need shame. I feel that it's human behavior to rationalize, and individually we all and powers to be and people that do things wrong often rationalize versus feeling shame.
Yes.
And it takes someone that's emotionally intelligent or in touch with a sense of self to be able to feel shame. I think that's all I have to say.
No, that's lovely. Thank you, Catherine. Bruce.
Well, like all these words, there's context and there's balance and so forth. John Bradshaw was a popularizer of shadow work back in the early 80s.
Who?
A fellow named John Bradshaw.
John Bradshaw.
And one of his books was The Shame That Binds You. And so the idea being that when you're raising children and they do something that's not appropriate, you'd say, well, that isn't the event, that's not appropriate, but you're fine, as opposed to, oh, you're awful.
Yes.
So, and then that creates trauma and that creates problems as adults. And you've got to go through your healing process. So, there's bad shame and there's good shame.
I think it's good. There is bad shame. There's a shame that creates abuse, and there's the shame that keeps us clean. Yeah. Yes. We'll have both there. Yeah. Now, Ward first.
I think shame is a reaction to going against a moral compass. Is there a moral compass? Is there good? Is there striving to achieve something? I think a lot of the things Nicholas is talking about can be considered attachment to power and wealth and ego and greed and separating yourself from everybody else. And I think when you do that, you should be ashamed because you're going against what the moral compass is. And it's back in McCarthy era where he was finally called out. Somebody finally had the decency to stand up and say, have you no sense of decency? As another way of stating it, aren't you ashamed of yourself?
Yeah. Thank you, Board. Mimi.
I was just thinking, instead of using the word shame for a politician for doing, lying and doing bad things, it's taking the responsibility for your actions.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important, that we take responsibility for our actions. And that's what people aren't doing anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it's wrong to shame children for doing something that they're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you don't want to make them as people feel bad, but just understand their actions, like Ward said, are against the moral standards.
Yeah.
Not them, but their actions.
It has moved, though, hasn't it? The things I like the way that Ian McGurkus says that in the old days we did have all these difficult things. Even with religion, you had all the difficult thing of selfishness and cruelty and all that sort of thing. But the difference now is that it is encouraged. We're encouraging this bad behaviour. We're making it normal, this sort of way of behaving. And we've lost something. Something of the compass has been lost in terms of the taking of responsibility that you were talking about, I think. Thank you. And also, I did also love that idea when that chap spoke about evil being, it's when an individual thinks that they can take the place of the universal and refuses limitation because they want to actually have that place of the universal. And we're in danger of that as we try to maintain our privilege in certain sorts of ways. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry, no, I didn't see you over there. That's great.
So you mentioned the 7 deadly sins, and you said that pride is often viewed as, the worst one. And I want to know your opinion, if you think one of the sins carries more weight than the others, if they're equal. And then if you believe that in some circumstances they can be, excused.
It's a very difficult question, though. Thank you for that. I think there are two things. I think, first of all, that, as Bruce said, context is everything, really. And, the context or almost those sins are lenses that people operate through. And so if you operate through the lens of lust, let's take that way, you can operate through the lens of lust, and you can operate in a way whereby there is a burning flame that creates a terrible fire the other side of it. Or you can use that lens of lust, and it could be sort of like just a little bit of warmth that's not particularly positive, but it doesn't have a big impact. So I think it very much depends upon the context with which you view the gluttony. I mean, Christmas Day I was probably a bit gluttonous with my eating of food. But it could take it to, the stage of the film The Grand Bouffe, where the bloke blew up because he was so gluttonous. That's a different stage. So I think it depends on the context. And in terms of excusing it, which is the second part of your question, is it an excuse for lust, or is there an excuse for... I don't know. I mean, I think we have to have compassion on ourselves more than anything else. I think we can be compassionate on ourselves and not be too hard on ourselves when we find ourselves going in those sorts of directions. I don't know if it's actually good, but, you could even say that there's an aspect of lust when people want to get married. That's not necessarily terribly bad, in those sorts of circumstances. You fancy somebody, and that's part of the whole game of getting married. So I think, and also, it's where you take it to excesses, I think. But also, I think we do have to have compassion on ourselves. Does that answer that for you? Thank you, Noe. I really appreciate the question. Anybody else like to say anything at all? Yes, Eric, thank you. Final one.
Yeah, I think when we think of Herod, we think of him as the epitome of shamelessness. Yet, very shortly thereafter, he was dead. So perhaps he did feel the shame, and he did feel the guilt, and perhaps it did destroy him.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, good point.